Hello and good evening. Welcome to our Facebook Live. My name is Andy O'Sullivan. I'm with the amazing Brian Guo. And
guys.
We are live here on our Facebook pages. And as always, what I love to say, we're live not on one, not on two, not on three, but across 5 different pages across Facebook. As I love to say, it's with technology. It allows us to share ourselves across so many groups to reach so many people. Brian and I are here this evening to talk about public speaking, to answer your questions on public speaking and anything that we can do to help you to get success, to build your confidence. So post your questions below and we will be delighted to answer them. Now we are, as I say, across 5 different pages. So if we don't get to answer your question tonight, we will either do it privately to you or we will make sure we cover it next time. Hopefully that sounds good to you. So as I say, I am with the amazing Brian Guo. So I'm going to ask Brian just say a few words to introduce himself to you in case you've not had the pleasure yet of meeting Brian and I. Then I'll say a few words about my background. Then we'll crack on with these amazing questions, some of which we've already received. So thank you to the people who have already submitted them. Brian, would you like to share a little bit about your background and the journey that you took to grow your public speaking skills and the confidence?
Of course, Andy. So I think it's the story started from way back in 2010. I was still back in university. I was learning English. I was getting really obsessed with learning English. And back then I had this dream of me giving a presentation to a large audience in English, even though my English was still horrible back then. Mm-hmm. And somehow I was just following that dream and ended up in London a couple of years later. So when I landed in London, what I realized is like, I felt like my English is good because I thought my English compared to my peers, compared to my friends around, I think, wow, I'm great. But the person who burst the bubble was the Turkish driver. I couldn't understand a single word. And I later realized it's not just the driver, it's pretty much everyone. Like my day-to-day conversation with people just get stuck all the time. So I lost my confidence. I was like, well, this is the only thing I spend so many time working on, but now I couldn't even have a conversation with people. So for like the first 6 months to a year, I was like basically just all by myself, not really reaching out and just speaking to people. And it get to a point where I realized I kind of have to kind of break out that comfort zone and start pushing myself to do something that's scary. So I started testing kind of with public speaking. I remember the first time I went to a speaking club in London, and that was pretty scary. But I kind of did it anyway. I was I don't know what happened on that day when I was asked if I would like to give an impromptu speech. I somehow said yes. And then everything's history. I did it. Even though I was scared, I really like the fact that I overcome my fear. So I keep coming back and practice my speaking skills. And I find I love it so much. So I keep coming back more. I was doing things like contests. I was speaking more and more and just keep getting better and better and better. And what happened is like the confidence I get from public speaking doesn't just stay when I'm like in my speaking club, when I'm giving speeches. It expands to every single area. Because when I want to say something at work, I can just freely express myself. And then I can put together my presentation at work, which is really engaging and get really good feedback from my colleagues. And that's when I get loads of exposure and promotion. And gradually from being the person who's like just a temp in the company, I was, within a couple of years, I was leading teams of 20, 30 people. Yeah, so that kind of like helped me realize like how much public speaking could help people. And that's why me and Andy started the Academy of Public Speakers. And I started helping people, to show people, help them get that confidence in public speaking. That's me, Andy.
Thank you, Brian. And it's interesting you say that. I mean, a couple of points, which we know from our clubs that we run twice a week now, not online, but we used to be live, but is how confidence, the once you get it, how it just seeps into so many different things. As you said there about you started working for your public speaking confidence, and now you're just kind of working and how it's affected you in your career and being able to express yourselves, even though it's got nothing to do with public speaking. how it just comes across. And so I love the fact that he actually even helped you generally, with your career and by being able to express yourself in meetings. And we know that from people who come to our clubs, how they've got interviews. He's doing job interviews. We had one guy scared of doing interviews, and he came to our meetings just to focus on that skill, getting the confidence to do that, so he can move on in his career. And actually, for me, it was very similar kind of way that I used to be petrified of public speaking, and used to be the boy who went bright red in meetings, never wanted to ask anybody any questions. Kind of a bit bright red now, but it was that feeling that being the centre of attention, being somebody's kind of introverted, I didn't want to stand out. I just didn't want to stand out. And isn't it the case that in your career, you have to stand out to get success? If you don't stand out, you're not seen as a leader and somebody who can take responsibilities. And that's obviously how it affected you as well, Brian. As your confidence grew, you got seen as a leader, hence your various promotions that you've achieved over time.
Yeah. I love how this is the journey of you kind of realize what you are capable of, kind of overcoming those limiting beliefs of like we have those all those limiting beliefs of who we are and what we should be doing. But I think it's a really good way to kind of break out of the shell and just kind of just being yourself and see who you really are. I think public speaking is the best channel to let yourself out.
I think it does. I think it does give you that freedom. I would say to people that even if you never, ever give a presentation in your life, ever, which I'm sure you will, by the way, even if it's a best man speech or something similar, the skills you learn and the self-development and the confidence you grow are just life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. So I would encourage anybody to develop their public speaking skills. Because let's be honest, once you leave your front door, you're speaking in public. Whoever you're talking to, aren't you? It's in public, Brian. You're not talking privately anymore. There's no such thing as private speaking.
It's all in my head. Having a conversation with myself right now.
I like it. Yeah, that's what it would be. There's no such thing as private speaking. So therefore, if you're speaking in public, you must have been doing it well, doing it with confidence. Well, don't we do it when we're chatting to our colleagues, Brian? Especially even things like this. We do so many online meetings now. We're still presenting and sharing things of ourselves. We've got to do that. So we have some questions. Let's move on to some of those, shall we, Brian? Let's see. What question we start with, Brian?
So this one is from Nick. So how many times should I read through my speech before giving it? How many times should I read through my speech before giving it? So do you mind if I just take this one, Andy?
Yeah, go for it.
I think for me, I think it's kind of you. I think there's something is being kind of assumed here. I guess by this question, you already have everything written down, I guess. You've written out the entire speech and you want to read it a couple times before you give it. So I would say, that the first thing is, do you really need to write it down? Because the first thing is that if you write the whole thing down, and then it becomes now instead of you communicating with your audience, it kind of becomes you have to now read the scripts. You have to remember everything word for word. And that's actually not good in a way, because now the focus kind of shifted from communicating to your audience to you have to remember every single word of your speech. So I would say probably that's the first thing to be aware of. Instead of written down the whole thing, probably have a few talking points and then practicing just talking those through. Because what you want to do ideally at this part is to kind of internalize the ideas, knowing what you want to talk about. So even though you just have 2 or 3 words, you can still kind of expand it to cover the idea. So I would say actually the first thing you want to think about is to probably not written down the entire speech word for word. Do you agree on this, Andy?
The worst thing people have is when they have it written down, Brian, and then they take that to the meeting, and that's what they use that's what they give to people. They hold it, or that's their notes. So definitely don't have it all written down. But I think, did you say, Nick was saying, how many times do I need to read through it?
Yeah. How many times?
So again, there's an assumption there is a set number. that you have to read through it. And of course, it's like saying, how many times do I have to do anything before I'm an expert or I know something? Of course, it depends. I'd say also it depends, Brian, whether it's a 1 minute speech or an hour speech.
Yeah.
It's going to be a different amount of time you need to go through it.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. You do want to internalize it, right? You've got to. I always do think, Brian, you might have heard me say this. One of the things I often talk about is that you want it to become like one of those stories we say to our friends and our family.
Exactly. Yeah.
And isn't it, right? The words don't matter. It's the message we're getting over. So if it takes you twice to get to that level, brilliant. Far better than I am. But if it takes you 20 times or 25 times or 100 times, it doesn't matter. You have to it's learning it. And then I think you were saying that having the shorter notes so that to keep you on track in the meeting. But you definitely don't want to be robotic and talk as though you're reading.
Yeah.
Because isn't it, well, you've seen that thing where, and we've seen this, where there's a difference between the written English and spoken English. And therefore you want to, by being natural, which is what you're saying, it just flows, doesn't it? It becomes part of you. Do you know, I've explained that well, Brian?
Yeah, I think it definitely makes sense. Cause, like you said, there's a difference between written English and like spoken English. And there's also a difference between when you're reading and when you're speaking, when you're talking to people. Because when you read, people mostly can tell that you're just reading from a script. But if you're just talking like you're chatting to your friend, that's totally like the feeling is totally different. So yeah, I think another point is that also depends on how well you know the content. If it's some of your like you're really it's something you have the expertise, you know really well, I think it's more like just listing the talking point. But if it's something that's brand new that you know nothing about, then I think probably you read or like writing a bit more out will be helpful as well. So it kind of depends. Yeah,
it does. So I think on a key point, I think you said that you mentioned there about when you know the content and you're delivering it, it's like talking to a friend.
Exactly.
I think that's a golden nugget. Right, that's a great point for people to remember, that if you can be that confident about your material, that confident about the content, that you can just deliver it as though you're chatting to a friend, right? I think that's just an amazing level to get to, because that's what everybody wants to feel, don't they? When they're in a meeting, they want to feel that you're talking to them, not that you're talking like a robot reading a script to them, and it all sounds really robotic.
No, that's the last thing. Yeah. Hey Siri.
Yeah, it is like Siri. Yeah. Actually, I think Siri's better than some of the people I've seen speaking, to be honest. Actually, Siri's also better than some of the speeches I gave in my own days as well. I openly admit that all the mistakes that are in the world with public speaking, I've made them. Every single one. From reading the script to reading the slides. It so is, right? And it is. And so if you can do what Brian mentioned there, get to the level you know your content, that it is just like you're talking to your friend. I just think that's such an amazing level to get to. So I would definitely do that. So rather than I think Nick wants to know about numbers, my thought, Brian, to close that one off would be, it's not having a set number. Oh, you just rehearse it 4 times or 5 times or whatever number. It's know it, that you feel comfortable with it. Know it, as you say, you can deliver it like you're chatting to a friend.
Exactly. When you know it, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
No, you know.
You know it. You know it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. That is so true. And I'm going to link into one that's come in just now, which is kind of because it links into preparation. And Rajan or Jan, I'm not sure you pronounce that. Apologise to you, Rajan or Jan, if I'm getting this wrong. Is asking, what's the best way to prepare for speaking off the cuff? Right. So that's an interesting question, because speaking off the cuff by its nature is there's no preparation.
Exactly.
But you're thinking, how do I prepare for that? So there are some things that you can do. But I mean, the biggest or the most obvious case of speaking off the cuff, of course, is job interviews, where people are asking you questions and you're answering them off the cuff, and that is such a crucial skill to learn. Actually, in our club meetings, we actually practice this at least twice for every member, because we realise the importance of it. So first of all, if you're going to say job interview, you should be prepared. You know they're going to ask you about you. You know they're going to ask you about your success, don't they? I mean, Brian, you know this. You've done enough interviews as well. There's certain interview questions they're going to ask you.
Exactly.
You know, and what do you get? There's what's your success? What challenges you had? Current roles, all those kind of set questions. Do you think of any others?
I think those are a lot like off the cuff, right? Because if you're going to an interview, it's more like what you're gonna be asked. So it's more like kind of like a prepared speech. Yeah.
But you should have your answer ready for those.
Exactly.
Questions, right? You know you're going to get asked them, right? So you're right in a way if they're not prepared. But it's amazing me when I've been the interviewer, you ask people that, and it's as though, what a strange question. I've never thought of that before, right? So it is having, if you know you're going to be asked questions on the subject, be prepared for that. What would they ask? A great thing I ask people, I don't know if you've done this, is when you give a presentation, is I sometimes think if I'm giving the presentation and there's Q&A at the end, one of the things that I do is think, well, if I was sitting there listening to this presentation, what would I ask? And put yourself in the mind of the audience. And by doing that, do you know what I mean, by Brian? Then you're thinking of the questions that they're going to ask.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it? So then some are going to come to mind about what it is that you would ask. So, I mean, the two things here are, first of all, think about what questions would you ask if you were in the audience? And then practice the idea, which is a separate thing, of getting used to answering questions off the cuff. I mean, in one of my trainings, I've got, there's, I don't know, how many systems are there? A dozen different systems of different structures and ways of answering questions. You can look these up as well. You can find them. There's different, to get used to that, practice at home. Because we are asked questions all the time. I mean, Crikey, we often say in our club meet, by the way, is you can be asked questions, you know, the boss in the lift type thing, anywhere people can ask you questions. But you mentioned earlier that, Brian, you know, when you went to the first group meeting, you were doing exactly that. You were answering questions off the cuff. And it's quite challenging at first, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think just before I move on, is a quickly kind of, I think what you offered is a quick summary of your solution. So one is kind of reduce the number of off-the-cuff speaking you have to do. So do prepare more and expecting what's coming up. If you're doing a Q&A, expect what the audience will be saying. And if you really are thrown into that situation where you have to answer questions off the cuff, I think like Andy said, there's loads of little tricks you can use. I would say one of the best ones, I think, and in our club we have always been sharing, is a simple 3-step structure: statement, evidence, and wrap up. We call it the SO formula. So this is like when you get a question, you first answer it and then back it up with a couple evidence, and then wrap up and reiterate your answer again. So by having a structure in place, whenever you get a question, you can always think quick. So it's a very nice way to help you organize the thoughts. I think one of the things that people didn't do well is like when they will ask a question, they're nervous, and then they just verbalize every single thought.
Yeah.
So it's just all a bit random. It's jumping from one thing to another, and it's not an organized answer, which kind of distract your audience as well. So having a structure, a little structure in place, kind of answer the question directly, and then come up with a couple points to back it up, and then wrap it up. In that way, it helps your audience understand the answer very well, I think. Kind of give you a chance to explain. Yeah.
It is getting used to doing it. It is just having a structure. Because otherwise, if you don't have a structure behind it, the answer can seem loose, it can seem woolly, and maybe even appear that you're not answering the question as you're kind of going off a different tangent.
Yeah.
That's why it actually is, Brian, so important to practice. Because when you're doing Q&A, there's a bit of pressure, isn't there? It's a bit that we can all dread because we don't know what they're going to ask us. You know, going back to the other question you had about preparing a speech, how many times to rehearse it, you can do that so you're comfortable with it. You never really know the questions or how they're going to be worded. I mean, in the end, you do. You get to know the people, are the likely questions. But it is that builds up that tension. And I remember the first time I did a Q&A meeting, at a meeting, I was so scared about the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
I prepared my script, Brian. I knew the speech, and it literally got to the Q&A, and it went along the lines of, so what questions have you got on what I've covered? None at all. Great, let's move on now then. Literally, I did. I didn't realise I did it that way. I gave nobody any time to ask me a question. I was that scared, that tense about it. So that's right. Use other systems like that.
Yeah.
So valuable, aren't they?
Yeah, and you also mentioned, right, Andy, like it's getting used to that. It's like the best way to prepare for speaking off the cuff is speaking off the cuff all the time.
Yeah. It's how it is, right?
Yeah.
It's how it is. It's like anything. You're not going to get used to anything unless you do it. So don't. Great point, Brian, because what you don't want to do is wait until you really need it and then start practicing it. Like anything in life, right? Don't wait till you're going to do a marathon before you start practicing to do the marathon. You want to practice long beforehand. Start building up and getting used to it. Great point there, Brian. What other questions have you got there, Brian? I see a few more coming in.
I have one from Helen. So when giving a presentation, do you think the content or the delivery is the most important? That's a really, really good question. For me, I think it's probably 50-50 or slightly leaning towards content. Because at the end of the day, it's still the content, like the words you're saying, the message you're sending out, that makes the difference. Because you might be a little bit nervous, or for me at the beginning, English is not my first language. There's probably like grammatical errors or inconsistency with words, or have an accent. But I think what's most important is still your message. Like, what are you kind of trying? What's the purpose of your presentation? And I think the only rule at the end of the day is that did you fulfill that purpose? Let's say if I'm giving a presentation and the purpose is to help the entire team understanding how to use the new system. And by the end of the day, if everyone understands how to use the system, then it's a win. So even though I might trip on a few words, I might be using and all the time, the delivery might be not great, but if the message is being delivered and people get the message and you kind of achieve the results you set for yourself, and then I think it's still a win. So I would say content is definitely more important. It's the core, and then delivery is something kind of adds to the content. So how do you kind of improve your delivery to help people receive the message?
Content, they are both important. I mean, you can't ignore one over the other. You've got to have good content. You've got to have good delivery. So it's something I think, Brian, you do have to, when you're like rehearsing, or as we always say to people, you've got to start preparing like way in advance, not an hour or two before the presentation. And it is a case of preparing them both, thinking about them both. You're not going to have a brilliant, successful speech with amazing content and awful delivery. Mm-hmm. If you had awful, the other way around, it's not going to work either. People get bored. So they are both important. I don't think you can say, now forget the delivery, just all the content.
Yeah.
Or forget the content, just have a great delivery. They are both important, and you have to consider them both, don't you? We often talk in our trainings, don't we, about staging and eye contact and sentence structure, things like that we often cover and talk about. But you're right. You mentioned there that it doesn't matter. The point you mentioned there, Brian, which you said it doesn't matter if there's some ums and ahs, etc. when you're doing the delivery. And if you're being natural and you say the odd one, it doesn't actually matter. I mean, if you've not prepared, this is the delivery, and your whole speech is hesitations, ums and ahs because you're so nervous, you've not prepared the content, then it becomes an issue, doesn't it? But if there's some, it doesn't matter. People do get hung up on that too much, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Feels like there's a threshold. Like, as long as your delivery is over a point, then it's okay.
Yeah.
But for your content, same for your content as well. But I think, I would say content is like they're equally, like I wouldn't say equally, they're both important, but I think content is, I don't know, 5-10% more important.
You can't ignore one. Look, having the key here, Brian, what I'm saying is like you can't ignore one over the other. You can't just have amazing content but forget the delivery, or the other way around. Don't worry. You've got to work on them both during your rehearsals, during your preparation. Think about them both. Definitely, yeah. Definitely. You can. We definitely can't say forget one. No. Both really important. But good question. Good question to think about. I want to say this one, Brian, that's coming as well from which one was it? I've lost track of it now. Which one I was going to do because there were so many. Oh, this is one about stories from Eileen, which I don't think I've done yet. Yes, Eileen says I keep hearing about using stories in speeches. It seems a bit odd to me. What do you think about it? When people talk about stories, I think I don't know if you, Brian, but when people talk about saying you've got to put stories in speeches, it always reminds me of when I was a kid and people used to settle down. And what we used to do when I was a kid, it'd be kind of like, once upon a time in a land far, far away. But we're not talking about those kind of stories because you wouldn't want to do that within a business presentation. You know, that might be odd, you know, being a manager sort of thing. Settle down. We're going to tell a story. I think great way to view stories, and I think we do get hung up on the word sometimes, stories. Think of stories as just personal experiences. That's all they are, aren't they? I mean, Brian, when we're talking, we share experiences, don't we? Things we've done, things that have happened to us. And that's really all the story is, isn't it? Just an experience. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's really powerful. I would say, I think it's probably one of the most powerful tools in public speaking as well. You just by kind of sharing the story, because that's what kind of gets human beings, I think, like why we love watching TV and movies and reading novels, and like they're all stories, and all the stories, they have a similar structure. It's all about someone trying to achieve something from point A, they want to get to point B, and how they get there, overcoming all the struggles. And this structure is like a magic. I mean, I think it's one of the most powerful things that you can use in your speech. Like imagine those presentations sometimes you have work. You just heard like playing information after like points after points. You just get like wear out. There's no emotion in it. There's no drama in it, and it's just like it's so hard to listen to. But if you add a bit like anecdotes and what happens, it could be like, it doesn't have to be like you said. It's not fairy tale stories. It's just like what you went through. Like like some of your personal experiences.
That's all it is, right? Nobody gets emotionally charged up and feels emotionally connected with a spreadsheet. Even Brian doesn't, and Brian likes it. Right? Even Brian doesn't.
Story, Andy. Challenge accepted.
It is. Yeah, we cover that another day. But nobody does, right? Nobody gets excited by those. But you tell a personal story. But it doesn't have to be about you. It could be a personal story about, it could be you. It could be a colleague, a client. You know, it could even be an anecdote generally. A quick tip, if ever you share about somebody else, always get their permission first. But that's what we connect with. So, Eileen, that's what I would say to you, is think about the experiences, if you like, your personal experiences or experience of other people. It's not a childish type story. Think of them as experiences, maybe a better word to share. Something you've experienced, something somebody you know had, anybody, those kind of things that support and then reinforce the point that you're making. And that is where the value can come, I think, in stories. If you're talking about customer service, for example, rather than just telling people we need to improve our customer service, we've got to be better at customer service. Here's a flow chart that shows our customer service. Maybe share the story of a client and how your good or poor customer service to your team has affected them, how it's affected their family or their business. that would have so much more impact than just a flowchart or spreadsheet, wouldn't it? And isn't that what we want to do, Brian? Just connect with people at that kind of level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's what we want to do, and that's why we do what we do. That's why we've been on this journey ourselves over the last, well, in my case, many years. Too many years I care to think about. Brian certainly how long has it been for you now, Brian?
4 or 5 years. 5 years.
5 years. 5 years for Brian. Kind of decades for me. But that's why we do this, right? Because we've been on this journey. We've learned this the hard way, and that's why we now love helping people like you to shortcut your training so you can get that success so much quicker. That's what it's all about. So that's why we do these lives. And that's even why we have something special we're going to share with you. Something that's going to help you. And actually, it links in brilliantly to one of the questions we had earlier from somebody, Rajan, about speaking off the cuff. This is really going to help them, Brian, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of linking back to the story, my personal story earlier when I was giving that, when I asked to give an impromptu speech and speaking off the cuff. And that experience, I think what really helped me is realizing the importance of having a place where you can practice. So that's exactly what me and Andy is doing right now. So we have 2 speaking clubs, one on Monday and one on Wednesday. So at the speaking clubs, what we do is with those weekly meetings, members will join and they'll be practicing how to speak, how to engage people, how to speak with confidence. So we have a variety of different speaking activities to help you build your impromptu speaking skill as well as your normal speaking skill. So we have a complete program on the basics of public speaking, and we break down the basic skills into modules so you can focus on one thing at a time. So each time you pick a module, you prepare a speech, a 5 to 7 minute longer speech, and then you present it to the group, then receive feedback from everybody, and then also from me and Andy. We'll give you something even more insightful. And also we have the impromptu speaking. We call it the spotlight speeches. That's where we kind of put you into uncomfortable situations. We'll be asking you tricky questions. Sometimes it can be really deep, philosophical. Other times it could be really random. So it's all about kind of like we mentioned earlier, the point of getting used to feeling uncomfortable and getting used to speak off the cuff. So if you throw out a random topic, now talk for 2 minutes in front of 20 people. Scary, right? But that's exactly what you need. That's the kind of thing you need to get yourself used to that feeling. So you can, when other time when you're speaking at work, when you're other places, you can just nail it.
Club meets online, so wherever you are in the world, you're able to join us. It's at 6:30 p.m. UK time is where we meet, or when we meet on Zoom. So when you join, you get all the links. So pop in and join us. Everything we do in the meeting is done to support our members. So Brian's talking about the questions we do. Brian and I spend Sunday usually sitting down, working out the questions, matching the members and the questions, so that although they may seem scary, we make sure that every single person succeeds, because that's so important to us. We spend a lot of time supporting our members to make sure every single person succeeds, as you will see they will. So do come along and join us one day, any Monday evening, any Wednesday evening, UK time. Could be afternoon to you where you are, but it's 6:30 p.m. UK time. So that is the link to go to join us if you want to join the challenge. Otherwise, message myself, message Brian, post a comment below if you're watching us on replay, and we'll be delighted to send you details how you can just pop into the meeting any time that you are free. Thank you for joining us today on our live. We'll be back again. Hopefully we will see you all then. So till then, take care. Goodbye from Brian.
Bye. See you.
And
Bye,
goodbye to me.
See you.
Bye.